It's about the future of our global community. And we will stand united with our transatlantic partners and with all European nations in defending this position. We stand united in saying that no violence and destruction as means to obtain political gains. We, the European Union, remain the stronger group of nations in the world, and this should not be underestimated. More immediately, we will be designing urgent assistance to Ukraine in this dire situation. We will also be active in supporting evacuation operations, including of our own staff in zones affected by this Russian attack. The European Union, together with transatlantic and like-minded partners, have made unprecedented efforts to achieve a diplomatic solution to the security crisis caused by Russia. But Russia has not reciprocated these efforts and instead has opted unilaterally for a grave and premeditated escalation, conducting to war. President Putin needs to stop this senseless aggression. And today our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. We will stand with them.
There were European leaders of the European Commission, which is the executive branch of the EU. You just listened to Joseph Borrell speak. He is one of the leaders. Again, the West, the European Union, NATO, the United States, all are in unity right now. They're unified in condemning what Russia is doing. Congressman, are you surprised the amount of solidarity, just all of the solidarity that's out there among Western allies? There were moments in the beginning of this crisis when American intelligence had the intelligence that suggested that Russia was planning an invasion. As we saw the troop buildup around Ukraine, there was some worry that, a country like Germany wasn't going to get on board because they were so reliant on Nord Stream 2. All of that has changed.
It certainly has. Putin did what many people thought would be impossible. He has managed, with this Ukraine attack, to unify really the world against him. The European Union statement that you just heard is extraordinarily important. It is difficult for the European Union to agree on who's going to make the most out of the pear crop in the spring and summer. But they've come together. They have come together very, very strong. They're going to issue more sanctions, and that's going to be a very serious problem for Russia. And NATO is totally unified now. Keep in mind that Trump spent 4 years doing everything he could to tear it apart. And when Biden came into office, it was in disarray. And so we need to really appreciate the extraordinary work that the Biden administration has done to rally and to solidify and to create the solidarity, not only with NATO, but now with the European Union. You had mentioned China before. The foreign minister of China said something that's very important, but has really been ignored along the way, and that is they are not in support of this attack in Ukraine. They've stood back from it. It's been the policy of China for years to not interfere in other nations. So we'll see where China is on this. So we're going to find in the days ahead more and more countries coming together to support Ukraine. The United States Congress has already passed in the National Defense Authorization Act increased support. The appropriations in the Congress are about to be completed, and we're already in those appropriations more financial support. Biden has issued $1 billion loan guarantee for Ukraine sovereign debt so that they could finance the war and the various support that'll be needed for the people of Ukraine. So many, many pieces are coming together here. What is the problem is the immediate war that's underway. People are dying. People will be harmed. and the civilians as well as the military. And Russia's going to have great pain and great trauma inflicted on them also, because the Ukraine army has been fighting for the last 8 years against Russia already. So they know the game. So it's going to be a vicious, nasty war. And it may very well, as we're beginning to see, turn out to be an urban war. And there's nothing worse. Well, every war is bad, but an urban war is just horrendous. So we need to stand with Ukraine. We need to not only hopes and prayers and thought, but also money, supplies, ammunition. And we're going to have to deal with the refugees that will undoubtedly, that are already leaving. It's going to be a tough
long lines
weeks
on
and months.
highways.
Yes.
We're seeing long lines at rail stations. And
exactly.
you mentioned the loss of life. We are already hearing the first reports of casualties. A bombing in Podolsk, which is in the Odessa region, 6 dead, 7 wounded, 19 missing. Those numbers, unfortunately, are expected to rise. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. Congressman Garamendi of California. And joining me now is former U.S. Ambassador to Russia and MSNBC International Affairs Analyst Michael McFaul. So, Michael, there is a lull right now. We are hearing that Russian troops or Russian tanks, have crossed the border and are heading into the interior sections of the country. I do want to talk to you more about your assessment, and this is video of that, your assessment of Vladimir Putin right now, and get your reaction to something Matt Bodnar told me a moment ago, that he was having a hard time finding anybody in Moscow who supports this incursion.
Well, with respect to Putin, we've been underestimating him for a long time. We kept dreaming about negotiating with him. He's been crystal clear that he wanted this war. Talking about NATO was all just a pretext for this war, and now he's launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I think it's the worst-case scenario. Katie, I have lots of friends all over the country of Ukraine. I've got 24 accounts open right now. It feels like every city is being attacked, including even in the West. This seems like a major operation, and just because we don't see it, because we only have a few eyes and ears from our incredible journalists, doesn't mean it's not happening. Second, I'm glad, Matt, the city of Moscow, that's probably true. That's where more liberal elites live. I don't know any Russians that support this war. It's hard to understand. Why are they going to war with the people that, on the one hand, Vladimir Putin keeps telling the Russians, people that they're just like us and they have our same cultural and religious and historic ties. And yet he needs to go in, as he announced to his people today, to cleanse this country of denazification, to get rid of the Nazis. That's what he said in his speech. And that just doesn't make any sense. Let's just be clear. Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, he's not a Nazi. He's from Eastern Ukraine. His first language is Russian, by the way. It's not even Ukrainian. He's Jewish. He's not a Nazi. And millions of Russians are not so idiotic as to not understand that.
Well, let me ask you about using the term Nazi. I mean, if you're in Russia and you're saying, I want to denazify a country, that hits Russia in the gut. How does that play? Why use the word Nazi specifically?
Great question. And you're right, it hits him in the gut, and that's why he keeps using it. Because the most important event for Russians and Soviet citizens is something called the Great Patriotic War. We call it World War II. That was the defeat of Nazis, where they lost millions of people. Every single Russian today has a relative that died in that war. The greatest enemy in the history of Europe, and they defeated them. According to their history, we'd had very, very little to do with it. And by the way, that's true. They bared the brunt of that. So he's trying to create that image, right? That this is a war not unlike the Great Patriotic War that we fought several decades ago.
The Nazis were severely, severely injured after trying to invade Russia in the winter months. And as you said, Russia did suffer a lot. Ambassador McFaul, given your assessment of Vladimir Putin as unhinged, you called him evil a couple hours ago. I heard the same thing from Kori Schake earlier today, calling him evil, using that word. Ukraine's diplomats at the UN have said it's not just going to stop in Ukraine. What we're seeing from our government is a military buildup in NATO states that along the eastern edge of Europe. How concerned should people be about this not ending in Ukraine and potentially starting something even bigger?
Well, I don't know. And I think we should be very careful that we think we can predict the future when wars start. But I'd say a couple of things. First, we should be grateful that we did expand NATO. This debate we've been having for the last several weeks, was it a good idea or not? Think about what in political science, we call it the counterfactual. What if there was no NATO? Then there'd be a lot more countries that would be exposed right now that have ethnic Russians living in them. So thank goodness we have NATO. Number two, I think the Biden administration is exactly right to send more soldiers to those places. I want to see NATO act together tomorrow as well. There's something called the NATO Rapid Response Force, the NRF, the response force. They should go and act so that Putin has no illusions that we will defend our NATO allies. But I don't want to be too, I don't want to get ahead of my skis. But think about all the wars that started with leaders promising they're going to be short little wars. We're going to be home by Christmas. It's just going to be contained to this one little place. We know that both the length of wars oftentimes go a lot longer than leaders promise, and sometimes they expand beyond the borders. And we're just in the first day of this one. This is the biggest war in Europe since 1939, since World War II. And I just think it's way too early to think that we know how it's going to end. I don't know, but I'm quite nervous about what happens, obviously, first and foremost in Ukraine, and what might be some unintended spillover consequences as a result of this war.
Well, I have two more questions for you. One of them is about nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin mentioned nuclear weapons earlier in his speech about denazifying Ukraine, just happened to mention that Russia is a nuclear country. And there's also talk about him potentially moving nuclear weapons into Belarus. What would that mean?
Well, both of those, the first that he mentioned nuclear weapons in that speech, that was scary to me. That felt very unhinged to me. And, I've been following Vladimir Putin for, a long time. I met him in 1991. I've followed his career. And for 5 years when I worked in the Obama administration, I used to deal with him. He seems a lot more disconnected from reality than ever before. And that scares me, especially when he starts talking about nuclear weapons. With respect to Belarus, I don't know exactly what he means about that, but I think the other thing you're seeing today, and, let's get the reporting right. Again, I don't want to get ahead of things, but I've seen on my Twitter feed and in my emails is that the Belarusian army is involved here. Most certainly, Mr. Lukashenko has been an ally. He allowed the Russians to be a staging ground. That you can see the map there, right? The fastest way to Kiev is from Belarus. And so as we think about sanctions and what should be done tomorrow, and I said tomorrow on purpose, by the way, this notion that we need to save something, keep our powder dry, I completely disagree with that analysis. I think we need to put everything on the table that we can, have economic shock and awe to the best of our abilities. And I think it needs to include Mr. Lukashenko and Belarus. They're allies in this war. They now need to be sanctioned as well.
And you believe it should also hit the Russian people, which is something that this country has been hesitant to do in the past?
I say that reluctantly. I've always been for targeted sanctions. In 2014, we have to work and I still believe we need to message to the Russian people. I'll be on Russian media later in the morning or day or whatever part of the day it is to now to keep talking about that there are Russians. I have lots of Russian friends that think this war is horrific. My phone has been lighting up saying this is a tragic day, not just for Ukraine, but for many Russians. But I think we have to get over the idea that somehow we're just going to do targeted sanctions against the oligarchs and Putin. Let's just lay to rest this idea that sanctions are going to affect Putin's calculus. They're not. We do not have in our arsenal a way to cripple Mr. Putin and the people around him. We need to do it. And the more we can do it, we should do it, and we should do it immediately. But we should have no illusions that it's going to happen overnight, that somehow is going to change his calculus. I think the only way it will is in the long run, when more of society begins to suffer and they realize they've become a pariah state, they've become this rogue regime, and that someday that they will begin to push back on their leadership that has led them down to this path of this horrific war of which there will be no winners.
Vladimir Putin told reporters on Friday that he's been working to insulate Russia himself from Western sanctions. He's been working toward that for the past few years, especially. And one more question about holding the country. Vladimir Putin has said he wants to demilitarize the country. I wonder, what sort of forces would he need? Does he have what he needs right now? Can we say his intention is to hold Kiev, to hold portions of Ukraine, because that is a lot different than invading?
I think you're right about that, and I don't want to pretend to be a general, though I talk to them every day. Those that I do talk to, with 4 stars, by the way, retired generals, let's be clear about that, they all say that the forces he's amassed are not enough to occupy. But he did say two very important things. You just echoed it. One, he's going to do denazification. So that sounds like a coup d'etat to me, right? He considers the regime in Kiev to be a neo-Nazi coup, a government put in place by a coup, backed by us. Don't forget, he always reminds the Russian people that they were backed by us. And just to underscore, it's complete nonsense, but that's what he's saying. But he also said we're going to demilitarize Ukraine. That suggests that he's going to go after every military asset that the Ukrainians have. That will be a prolonged war. That will not just be, a blitzkrieg in and out. And I suspect this will be going on for a long, long time.
What about this reporting that we had that the UN presented, or the United States presented a letter to the UN about what intelligence shows is a kill list that Russia has? Now, Russia's denied that this list exists. Earlier today, I spoke with a woman who was a former member of parliament who says that she has reason to believe that she is on that list. From your experience in Russia, is that sort of thing plausible?
It's very scary to me, what was reported, right? And we're just talking about what's been reported. We can't confirm it. Yep. Most certainly, it's a Putin tactic. He's arrested lots of people. The leader of the opposition, he tried to kill and poison, Alexei Navalny, and now he sits in jail with trumped-up charges. They're going to extend those for 10 or 15 years, it looks like. So I would not be surprised at all. And those are people I know personally, too. I know exactly who would be on that list. And another thing to remember, Katie, Russian intelligence services, right? Their military intelligence, the GRU, SVR, SVB, all the basic different pieces that broke away that we used to be part of the KGB, they already are highly penetrated within Ukrainian society. So if they want to do that, I think they'll have the capabilities to do that. And I can tell you, friends of mine are very scared about that.
I would be very scared as well. Ambassador Michael McFaul, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you have a long day ahead, and tomorrow is already here. It is today already. Former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to look right now at some live pictures of Kiev. Coming up after the break, we're going to go to the White House and get a rundown about exactly what happened today or last night and into this morning inside the White House as the invasion and the bombings started in Ukraine. Again, this is a live shot of Kiev. Look at that line of cars trying to get out. A complete and utter standstill.
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism. But when the school board presented its plan, it ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory.
Racism in reverse. False narrative. Shame.
This is Southlake. All episodes available now.
What does her ascension mean to you?
Ask a simple question.
Ukrainians are waking up to war as Russian forces mount an aggressive attack. Those are the bomb sirens signaling an attack underway in the capital city of Kiev. That is from earlier this morning. NBC News crews on the ground reported loud explosions in Kiev and other key cities in the country. You're looking right now at smoke over the northeast city of Kharkiv, again from earlier this morning. The explosion started just minutes after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced military action against Ukraine. And in the last 15 minutes, we've learned of the first casualties. 6 people are dead after a bombing in the Odessa region in southwestern Ukraine. 7 people are wounded and 19 people are missing. Those numbers are expected to rise. In response, Ukraine's president ordered martial law, closing schools and placing hospitals on high alert. And right now, Ukraine's military is fighting back. Ukraine's defense minister says it shot down 5 Russian planes and a helicopter. As for the U.S. response, President Biden will meet with G7 leaders later this morning to impose, quote, severe sanctions on Russia. President Biden will also address the nation later this afternoon. Shortly before midnight Eastern time, President Biden wrapped up a phone call with Ukraine's leader. Biden promised American support and assistance for the Ukrainian government and its people. Joining me now is NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin. She, again, is in Kiev, Ukraine. Erin, we are looking right now at a long line of cars in gridlock, presumably trying to get out of that city.
Yeah, that's right, Katie. And the last explosion that we've been able to hear was about 30 minutes ago. We also heard what sounded like some sort of fighter jet flying overhead. Worth noting that the airspace in Ukraine is currently closed. All eyes at the moment on the Sankivka border crossing. That's a border crossing that's about 3.5, 4 hours away from here. We were there a few weeks ago. It's a sparsely populated area, but what we are now seeing a live stream footage of tanks streaming across the border from Belarus into Ukraine. Also, in the small hours of this morning, we started to hear those, explosions. And according to an advisor to the Minister of Interior, there were a number of targets that were struck, including military installations and an airfield. I was just texting with an advisor to the mayor of Kiev, and he sent me a photo of what he says is a military base that was completely blown out in that attack. This as they have announced here martial law throughout Ukraine and in Kiev. They're telling people to stay home and to stay calm, although, as you mentioned, Katie, people are evacuating the city in total gridlock, moving to the west of the country, where is commonly believed to be the safest place to be in the event of a Russian attack. It's an extraordinarily tense situation. We have heard from President Zelensky once again urge everyone to remain calm, but they are instructed, if they do hear air sirens, which we have not heard for some hours here in Kiev, to make their way to bomb shelters. Katie.
The mayor of Kiev also to the people of Kiev via his Telegram channel said Ukraine is attacked by the aggressor. The roar of shells can be heard in Kiev. The worst enemy now is panic. We do not lose endurance. Everyone who is not involved in the critical infrastructure and livelihoods of the city, stay at home. Keep an alarm suitcase ready. Documents a minimum of things required to quickly, if necessary, get to the shelter or storage. City authorities are in the capital. We continue to ensure the functioning of the city. Hold on. We must persevere. Aaron, he's telling people to stay put. And what we're seeing right now, people, a lot of them at least, not staying put.
Well, that's right. And it's going to be increasingly difficult to leave. Keep in mind, this is a city of around 4 million people. So to evacuate an entire city of this size is pretty much impossible to do on short notice. And so I think that is why authorities are now saying, please stay at home. So far, it is worth noting that in those airstrikes in the overnight hours, we're primarily targeting military targets, airfields, that sort of thing. It does not appear to be at the moment that there are any targets targeting the civilian population, although obviously people waking up to windows rattling and the sounds of explosions is completely terrifying. Most Ukrainians here that I've been talking to anyway say they have had contingency plans that they themselves have created. They've been listening to this dire assessments from the West. They realized the threat on their doorstep. They saw this massive troop buildup over the past couple months or so, and they've been making their own preparations. They have their go bags ready. Some have already sent their children to the western portion of the country. But I would have to say, in conversations that I was having here, people were skeptical. They never really thought it would come to this. So I think plenty of people here in Ukraine are absolutely stunned by the turn of events that Russian President Vladimir Putin announced in the small hours of this morning. Katie.
And NBC had reporting today, or now yesterday, about parents sending their children to school yesterday with their blood type on stickers to make sure that, in case of the worst, that people knew what type of blood to give their kids. It's very scary. It's very scary. I mean, just a few weeks ago, you were showing me, we were seeing images from Ukraine during your live shots of families ice skating in the middle of Kiev. And to think that this is the reality now is to use a word that is going to get overused, chilling. Aaron McLaughlin, thanks so much. Let's bring in NBC News investigative reporter Dan DeLuce. So, Dan, you've been tracking Russia's military movements. What can you tell us?
Well, I think we're seeing what the U.S. government, with the Pentagon, the intelligence community have forecast and warned was coming. So at every stage, we saw the cyber attacks, the wave of cyber hacking and attacks that targeted Ukraine's government earlier today. And then with the actual military operations, you're seeing a barrage of missile and airstrikes, artillery fire, exactly that was really warned about, and it's that euphemism the military uses, shaping the battlefield. It's a way of trying to strangle and decimate and damage Ukraine's military before really any sizable land force moves across the border into Ukraine. And it's also a psychological element there. You discourage your adversary through kind of the sheer power you have in the air and from a distance. And so that's what we're seeing. They're going after these air bases, it appears. They're going after military targets. And so this is really a test. How well did Ukraine prepare for this moment? How well are they equipped and armed from the U.S. and the West? How is the Ukrainian leadership going to respond to this? You know, we see that traffic jam. We see civilians trying to leave. How well was Ukraine prepared, and how well prepared is Europe for this wave of refugees that is heading west now to EU countries like Poland? So a lot of open questions right now, but clearly Russia is kind of going with this playbook that was predicted by Western governments and by the White House. Unfortunately, those predictions seem to be true so far, and we'll just have to see what Russia does after this aerial bombardment. What comes next? How far they go? Do they cut off Kiev? Do they go after the ports on the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov and really kind of blockade Ukraine's economy? Russia's Navy has really total superiority. That's something to watch for. How many troops and tanks start moving across the border? What areas do they try to occupy? This is still very early stages now, and we're still waiting to get a lot of details. But yes, the casualties have started, and Russia has started to unleash its firepower in terms of artillery and missiles, and it's a very sobering moment.
Dan, do we know anything about whether they are just Russian troops that have crossed the border? We've been looking at images of tanks crossing the border from Belarus into Ukraine. We believe they are Russian tanks. Any indication, though, that there are Belarusian troops that are assisting Russia right now? Any that might also be entering Ukraine?
We don't know. I think that is a very good question, and it is a distinct possibility. At minimum, Belarus has opened its doors and opened the gates to Russia's military and Russia's forces to be deployed and to be crossing that border and to be, it appears to be staging, missile or artillery strikes from a distance. So Belarus is definitely assisting this operation. Now, whether there are Belarus actual troops in Ukraine, we'll wait to see. Russia doesn't really necessarily need that assistance, but it might want some extra manpower. We'll have to see. But Belarus is clearly doing Putin's bidding throughout this.
And Ukraine is getting ready. They've got the military. We also got this message from the Ministry of Defense, Ukrainian Minister of Defense on Facebook to the Ukrainian people. It says, "Dear fellow compatriots, the enemy attacks, but our army is unbreakable. Ukraine goes into total defense mode. Anyone who is ready and able to hold weapons may just now become the level of the territorial defense forces of the armed forces of Ukraine in your region." And then it goes on to say, here's how you get weapons. Contact this station and you can get weapons. Just bring your passport. Death to the Russian occupiers. Glory to Ukraine. We've seen images of civilians training with wooden or cardboard weapons, training everyday civilians, training to fight off an attack. Erin McLaughlin was talking about how she met a grandfather, an older man, who said that he was ready to shoot Russians if need be. Certainly a scary situation over there in Ukraine. Dan DeLuce, Dan, thank you so much. Let's bring in now CNBC's Rosanna Lockwood. Rosanna, I do want to talk a little bit about the global impact that this is having, particularly on the markets. The ruble is down quite a bit, but what else can you tell us?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that just from a tone perspective here at CNBC this morning, the way that we're dealing with it, of course, is looking at the financial impact of what we've seen happen overnight in Ukraine. But it doesn't mean that businesses and traders out there are in hunting for profits. It's actually got to consider that a lot of this war is going to be fought from the Western side. Economically, we will face huge economic sanctions packages. And we're interested in the way that's affecting markets this morning. So Asia, that is normally the early warning sign, closing down sharply lower in the red. European markets have just opened deeply in the red as well. The broad stock 600 off by as much as 3%, seeing bourses in Europe in decline. And as we look at US futures as well, our indicator of how Wall Street is about to open in a few hours' time, sharply lower, by which I mean almost 850 points to the offside for the Dow Jones. So that is very major indeed. Now, you mentioned the ruble there. It's actually fallen to its lowest level against the USD on record. No big surprises there. And we are, of course, monitoring the economic situation in Russia itself. You've got the MOEX Russia index, which is their index in that country, down almost 30%. So all this idea that a lot of this risk was already priced into Russian companies and Russian markets is being proven not so true this morning. Now, I think it also behooves us to remind viewers that from a sanctions perspective, what the White House will be focusing on, and other major Western powers as well, will be energy. We're already in an energy crisis in many parts of the world. Russia accounts for around a quarter of all natural gas exports. Any disruption to gas supply pipelines through Ukraine could cause major supply disruption here in Europe. We already know that approval for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline has been frozen. It's likely now off the table. You could also see this idea of Russia being moved from the SWIFT financial messaging system, which has been one of the major sanctions threatened against Russia for years, but has never actually been deployed. And in terms of elsewhere in the markets, keeping a very close eye on commodities, natural commodities, things like wheat, with Russia and Ukraine accounting for just a huge export globally of wheat. Oil, now that is the major one to look at. Crude oil topping $100 a barrel this morning for the first time since 2014. Now, when you consider how oil is going to be traded, traders around the world will have to be very careful with this barrage of sanctions about how they handle barrels of Russian oil. Russia, of course, another major global exporter of that. And also raw materials, things like nickel, palladium, aluminium, titanium. Russia is a big player in those markets as well. So when we take it all into account, this is going to have a huge roiling effect on the global markets. And then in terms of where investors are looking today, in terms of how they're sort of hedging their portfolios, it's a risk-off sentiment. You're seeing a lot of sell-off in equities, so we're going to continue likely to see bourses declining throughout the day in the equities market. And then you have this traditional, what we call in the markets, flight to safety. So instead, investors will look to put their money into safe assets like gold. You've seen that topping, heading up towards $940 an ounce so far in the last couple of hours. And you also see investors piling into fixed income, into bonds. That's considered a safe haven in the market. So with that, you see yields coming off bond prices as well. So everything we've seen this morning in terms of activity in the markets has been to be expected, but I would say it's been extreme, some of these movements. We're going to continue monitoring them throughout the morning, especially as we head towards the Wall Street Open.
And I do hope you keep us updated on this. One quick question about SWIFT. I know that's a set of sanctions that have been threatened against Russia for some time now. What would it mean to pull Russia's ability to access SWIFT?
It would be absolutely enormous, Katie. It basically means that Russian financial payments inside and outside the company couldn't be made in cross-border transactions. SWIFT is a huge part of the major cross-border banking transaction system. So far, as you said there, it's never actually been pulled on Russia. So whilst there have been sanctions against Russia in terms of financial payments and cross-border transactions since 2014, since the annexation of Crimea, and it has made it a lot harder for Russians to get their money outside the country, for foreigners to do business with Russian companies and with Russian banks. There have been ways around this. For example, in the past couple of years, there have been banks in Europe, places like Germany, that have set up corresponding bank relationships with banks inside Russia. So if you wanted to send your money inside or outside Russia, you would deal with one of these banks instead. And that was seen as a way of kind of helping the system. But in terms of the way that the Kremlin views this, of course, we've heard them saying repeatedly in the last few weeks that they can shrug off sanctions. They've learned to live with sanctions. But given that SWIFT, this huge global financial messaging system, this great big tool in terms of sanctions, hasn't been deployed yet, if and when it is deployed, that would indeed have a major effect on isolating Russia further from the global financial network.
Rosanna Lockwood. Rosanna, thank you so much for laying that out for us. And let's bring in NBC News correspondent Carol Lee now. She's across from the White House. Carol, tell me about how this went down inside the White House earlier.
Well, Katie, the first real indications that we got from the White House that they were beginning to contend with this attack on Ukraine was one of their national security advisors was scheduled to appear on MSNBC in the 9 p.m. hour, and they pulled that down around 8:40. And what we learned is that it was because that official was then pulled into a meeting with national security officials, Treasury Department officials, State Department officials to discuss what they needed to do here in terms of next steps. And at that same time, the president's team, including his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, were huddled in the West Wing, putting together this statement that the president ultimately issued around 10:25 p.m., where he said that this was an unprovoked attack by Russia, that it was a violation of international law, and that it was something that would cause significant loss of life. After that, the president then got on the phone with President Zelensky of Ukraine. The White House issued a statement saying that President Zelensky had reached out to talk to President Biden, and so they discussed a number of things, including that the U.S. would continue to provide assistance to Ukraine throughout this, and that the president would rally the international community essentially to support Ukraine and to condemn and isolate Russia. To that effect, you have the president having a meeting or phone call later today with the G7 leaders, where they're going to discuss those very severe sanctions that we've heard the White House say, not just today, but in recent days, that they would impose on Russia if they went further and took this step. They already, as you know, outlined some sanctions earlier this week in response to Russia's initial invasion, but they promised that they would ratchet them up if Putin escalated, and we've seen that in the last few hours, and so that's what they're prepared to do. At the same time, here in Washington, you're hearing from a number of lawmakers who are condemning this, Republicans and Democrats, and so the administration is scheduled to brief lawmakers on the situation in Ukraine and the administration's response later today, and you can bet you'll hear more. They have a lot of opinions about what the U.S. should do in terms of sanctions against Russia. But for now, the president's going to speak later today. It's the first we'll hear from him. We've only seen written statements from him since this attack began. And he's supposed to outline what they've said are going to be some very severe sanctions. So we'll be looking to see exactly what the White House decides to do, and particularly whether they decide to leave some on the table to do later if Putin then further ratchets up.
Carol, any indication that SWIFT is on the table?
So they've said that SWIFT is still on the table, that it's something they're considering, but it's very complicated. It is something that could really have blowback, not just on the U.S. economy, but on the European economy. It's not something it's very tricky to do. And what we've heard from President Biden is that he wants to try to do these sanctions against Russia in a way that doesn't inflict so much pain on the American people and our economy. We're already seeing skyrocketing gas prices. That's something that he's going to have to contend with. Those are only going to get worse. And another thing that they're preparing for, Katie, is cyber attacks. Russia has a lot of tools in terms of cyber warfare, and they've been trying to prepare private businesses for that, for American companies, banks, financial institutions, the government for something like that. And so they're managing the domestic fallout here, and SWIFT is something that they've been thinking about, that they say they're willing to do, but that would potentially have some real blowback on the U.S. economy.
Carol Lee, across from the White House. Carol, thank you so much. And we're going to take a very, very quick break. When we come back, we're going to go back to eastern Ukraine, to Kharkiv, and our correspondent, Matt Bradley.
What does her ascension mean to you?
Ask a simple question.
We think she is the first woman of color vice president.
Ask everyone you know what matters to them and why.
Let's be clear. This isn't about fraud.
Favor facts over conspiracy.
The facts and the history are instructive.
And trust standards over hearsay.
The highly contagious Delta variant of COVID-19 was first discovered in India. Variants can develop anywhere in the world, especially in countries with the lowest vaccination rates. Providing vaccines to the world is not an act of pure generosity. It is an act of self-defense that is necessary to help protect Americans from the spread of future variants.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 on MSNBC. When you need answers first thing in the morning, when you need to go deep inside Washington and hear from someone who's been there.
Perhaps the greatest threat to American democracy right now is misinformation that's being spread around.
You need your Morning Joe.
Whether it's the politics of climate change, the effects of marijuana laws, or the challenges of racial injustice, get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust, like Alicia Menendez, Mehdi Hassan, and Frank Figluzzi, along with a growing list of experts offering their insights. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
One bill would eliminate the requirement that students be taught the, quote, history of white supremacy, including but not limited to the institution of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. American history is littered with shameful policies, but it is also filled with freedom fighters. To teach our children anything else is to rob them of their heritage and the truth, and they deserve better.
When you need brutal honesty.
These conspiracy theories are not only making people stupid, they're making them sick.
When you need answers first thing in the morning.
What's the key to progress to bringing this home and getting this deal done?
What is the military posture of the United States now toward Afghanistan?
You need your Morning Joe, only on MSNBC.
Controversy in South Lake tonight after teens posted a racist video.
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism.
My children were told Rosa Parks is dead. You all have to sit in the back of the bus.
But when the school board presented its plan, this small town fight ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory. Racism in reverse.
False narrative of rampant racism.
Shame. This is South Lake, an NBC News podcast. All episodes available now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you feel like the bad guy in this? Why should they believe you when they know that people are getting in? Has it been worth it to make this trip? Do you feel like you're giving a green light to politicians? How do you explain why your case has become so important? We're back now from Las Vegas,
Seattle,
from Guatemala City,
from Wilmington.
I was in space in Texas, from Normandy,
from
France.
Surfside, Florida. Thank you for watching, everyone.
And joining me now is NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley, who is in Kharkiv, Ukraine. So, Matt, what is it like there right now?
Well, the whole city seems to be shut down. We're starting to hear talk of people who are lining up at gas stations. There are cars lining up for blocks, people lining up to try to buy food at grocery stores. And most of the shops are closed. You know, this city isn't seeing what my colleague Aaron McLaughlin is seeing in Kiev, with columns of cars fleeing to the west. I'm not sure what the expectation is here, but this is eastern Ukraine. So a lot of people here are used to the instability. We're close to those separatist enclaves. And so it seems the attitude here, for the most part, appears to be sheltering in place. But we are 25 miles south of the border with Russia. So that means that once Russian tanks and attack helicopters breach that border, they will close in around this city, the second largest in Ukraine, in very, very little time. And that is the expectation. We've heard that there have been engagements with border patrol and border military up north of here at the border with Russia, that they are moving in. We haven't seen them actually reach this area yet. A lot of the action we're hearing actually is south, near Crimea and Odessa. Now, whether or not they close the distance in the next couple of hours, it's yet to be seen. I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing soldiers in the streets, including in this main square, very shortly. Katie?
Matt, I want to touch on some of the reporting that you've had over the past few days when you were in some of these border towns. When you were interacting with people, regular people, what was your sense of how they were planning on reacting to Russian troops?
Everybody said that they would fight. Katie. And that's the thing. There was this sort of exuberance. You could call it almost an irrational exuberance when it comes to their capabilities. But we heard a lot of people saying that they were going to fight. And that's interesting, because this is a Russian-speaking part of Ukraine. This is the territory that when Vladimir Putin talks about the Ukrainian connection with Russia, this is kind of what he's talking about. And this is a metropolis that owes a lot to Russia in a certain way. A lot of people here settled here from Russia centuries ago, and they speak Russian in day-to-day language. But this was a city that posted a major resistance against the Russians when they came in back in 2014. So we can expect that they'll do the same thing again. But, as I was telling you earlier, I think one of the real risks here, Katie, isn't that the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people will give up without a fight. The risk here is that they will fight. And that's going to cause a lot of civilian casualties, especially in a huge city like this one.
Matt, you were talking about your expectation that you might start seeing troops on the streets in Kharkiv. There are reports right now of Russian tanks just outside of the city limits, and some local sources purporting to show them in photos. You haven't yet seen anything of that, have you?
We haven't gotten eyes on anything like that quite yet. We're just seeing empty streets. And again, over the last couple of days, just as recently as yesterday, these streets were clotted with people, children, everybody going to work, living their normal lives. This is a busy, dynamic city. And now there's no one here, which is why instead of people fleeing, as Aaron was describing from Kiev, the capital, it seems like everybody just seems to be kind of waiting. And it's very tense at the moment. Tense silence. Katie?
And just to be clear, that video that we're showing of tanks, those are tanks crossing the Belarus border into Ukraine, not quite close to where you are, Matt Bradley, just to be clear for our viewers. Matt, thank you. We're going to check in with you again quite soon. Let's go now to NBC News producer Matt Bodner, who is in Moscow. So, Matt, what is the Russian Defense Ministry saying this morning?
Thank you, Katie. Well, we're starting to see now kind of a counter-narrative emerge to some of the things we're hearing from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry. So this is being not described as a war. It is a special operation, and they are particularly emphasizing several points, that they are using precision strike weapons, that they are not targeting civilians, that they are at the moment actually already claiming to have suppressed Ukrainian air defenses and taken out military infrastructure at air bases and airfields. They continue to emphasize, though, that they are not there to lay siege to cities, for example. They are not there to hurt civilians. They continue to insist that the Ukrainian military simply needs to lay down its arms. They're claiming that some Ukrainian soldiers already are laying down their arms. Simultaneously, we're seeing claims out of Donetsk and Luhansk, of course, those breakaway regions we've spent so much time talking about recently, are asserting their territorial claims. We're hearing here in Russia that this is all about those territorial claims, nothing larger. But that makes you wonder then, why are we seeing video of Russian tanks pouring across the border from Belarus? I think that there's still going to be some narrative development here in Moscow today, but this is what the Russian audience is being told now. And it's interesting because they seem to really, really be emphasizing certain key points: limited nature, not using the term war, precision strikes, not harming civilians. And that's what we're seeing from the Russian Defense Ministry.
Any expectation to see Vladimir Putin again today?
At the moment, not aware of a publicly scheduled meeting, but he can appear at any moment on television, as he did at 5:45 this morning.
Matt, what would it mean for Russia, for Moscow, for the people that you know in that city if the EU and the West fully breaks away from Russian energy?
Well, I mean, it can have severe rundown effects on the Russian public. And I guess one thing I want to emphasize is that Moscow is a very different place from much of the rest of Russia. And so while, we've been talking about kind of my very unscientific assessments of Russian public opinion on this at the moment, I'm seeing, I think, a limited snapshot of essentially worldly kind of middle-class Muscovite Russians who maybe feel themselves having more to lose in a total break from the West, economically, culturally, politically, if that happens. But there's a fear about the ruble, which is, I just saw, has hit one of the lowest exchange rates to the dollar on record, if not the lowest. Russian market, of course, taking severe hits. And for a time this morning, the Russian stock exchange actually ceased trading. So there are very real economic impacts that can happen. That will start to be felt by Russian citizens. I think that they're not feeling it yet. Of course, everyone's very alarmed about the ruble exchange rate. But again, we're still in this process here, I think, of really the gravity of this sinking in. We are not yet seeing, for example, the kind of unanimous uproar of approval that we saw back in 2014 when Russia seized Crimea. That was a genuinely popular move. We're not seeing any indication of that yet on a mass scale.
A good reminder, Russia is an exceedingly large country. Matt Bodner. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Let's go now to Volodymyr Yermolenko from the suburbs of Kiev. He's the chief editor of UkraineWorld.org. He's also the analytics director at Internews Ukraine. Volodymyr, thank you so much. What is it like there right now?
Well, it's difficult, of course. We wake up this morning at 5 p.m. with hearing huge explosions, and now it appears that in Brovary, in the Kiev suburb where I live, there is a military unit. So there are some reports that the military unit was attacked and one person was dead. So it means that even when you're in Kiev, you are basically also the target of the attack.
Are you planning on staying?
Yes, the life will show, but we are now moving outside Kiev, like those people who are on the cars that you see, because we consider it as our land, and we should not leave it. Why should we leave it?
What have you done to prepare in case you do have to leave it?
Well, there are some foodstuffs that we collected. There is water that we collected, of course, because when there was explosions, the water was cut. Plus, we have a little house outside of Kiev. Maybe we will move our family there. And of course, we have some necessary things, the bags that we can just put on a car and go somewhere.
If it comes to it, are you prepared to defend your country?
Of course we are prepared. And according to public opinion polls, the majority of Ukrainians are prepared to defend their country, and many of them are ready to do that with arms. There are many people who know how to do it because they went through the war from 2014. Ukrainians, over 80% of Ukrainians hate Putin, and about 70% consider Russia as a hostile state. So when Putin is saying that, look, there are civilians, there are good people and are pro-Russian, it is total lie. But of course, the question is about the military equipment, because they are attacking us with missiles, with airstrikes. What can civilians do?
I wonder, before any of this invasion, obviously, taking that out of it, why is there such antipathy? Why is there such disdain for Vladimir Putin in Ukraine? Why do Ukrainians want nothing to do with the Russian state?
Well, Ukrainians were quite positive with regard to Russia before 2014, but then Russia, under very absurd claims about Ukrainian nationalism, occupied Crimea, then invaded the eastern Ukraine. So, of course, there was a general feeling, and there is this general feeling that Russia is an occupier. So we live with this feeling for 8 years. And don't believe Russian propaganda who is telling you that Russian speakers support Putin or support Kremlin. This is not true. There are many Russian speakers in Ukraine who are, of course, are ready to support Ukraine, supporting Ukraine, and showed it with their deeds in all these 8 years.
Volodymyr, thank you so much, and we do wish you luck. We're looking at images right now of a major thoroughfare in Ukraine that is just at a dead stop. Some people getting out of their cars here and there to see what the holdup is. People trying to leave Kiev, but you say you are staying and that you are willing to fight for your country. Volodymyr Yarmolenko, thank you very much, and please do stay safe. And coming up just after a very quick break, we're going to get more on the U.S. reaction. Stay with us.
What does her ascension mean to you?
Ask a simple question.
Everything. She is the first woman of color vice president.
Ask everyone you know what matters to them.
Where do we go from here?
Ask the why.
Why is this happening?
The hows.
How did you get your politics?
The wait a minute.
Okay.
Be tough on the answers.
It was deliberate deceit.
Favor facts over conspiracies and trust standards over hearsay.
The highly contagious Delta variant of COVID-19 was first discovered in India. Variants can develop anywhere in the world, especially in countries with the lowest vaccination rates. Providing vaccines to the world is not an act of pure generosity. It is an act of self-defense that is necessary to help protect Americans from the spread of future variants.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 on MSNBC.
Whether it's the politics of climate change, the effects of marijuana laws, or the challenges of racial injustice, get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust, like Alicia Menendez, Mehdi Hassan, and Frank Figluzzi, along with a growing list of experts offering their insights. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
One bill would eliminate the requirement that students be taught the, quote, history of white supremacy, including but not limited to the institution of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. American history is littered with shameful policies, but it is also filled with freedom fighters. To teach our children anything else is to rob them of their heritage and the truth, and they deserve better.
When you need brutal honesty.
These conspiracy theories are not only making people stupid, they're making them sick.
When you need answers first thing in the morning.
What's the key to progress to bringing this home and getting this deal done?
When you need to go deep inside Washington.
What is the military posture of the United States now toward Afghanistan?
And hear from someone who's been there.
Perhaps the greatest threat to American democracy right now is misinformation that's being spread around.
You need your Morning Joe, only on MSNBC.
Controversy in South Lake tonight after teens posted a racist video.
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism.
My children were told Rosa Parks is dead. You all have to sit in the back of the bus.
But when the school board presented its plan, this small town fight ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory.
Racism in reverse.
False narrative of rampant racism.
Shame.
This is South Lake, an NBC News podcast. All episodes available now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Still to come on the Channel 2 News.
Well, the waters are certainly receding now.
Still too close to call.
Lester Holt reporting from
Ground Zero, as it's being referred to.
It is, in fact, the taste of freedom.
The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency. What's the biggest risk right now?
Some of the troops who have been proud.
I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You with some resilient folks, let me get a hint.
Get your daily dose of written perspectives about the issues that matter most. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
We're back now from Las Vegas,
Seattle,
from Guatemala City,
from Wilmington.
I was in space in Texas, from Normandy,
From
France.
Surfside, Florida. Thank you for watching, everyone.
Again, looking at traffic leaving Ukraine, again, at a standstill, as it just seems thousands upon thousands of Kiev residents are trying to get out of that city, fleeing presumably west and away from Russian troops. Joining me now is NBC News correspondent Julie Sirkin at the Capitol. Julie, a lot of congressmen and women have been up all night. So far, at least, they've been tweeting about what they have been seeing and what they know. Marco Rubio comes to mind, tweeting a lot of intelligence about the operation in Ukraine. What's the reaction been?
Well, they've been tweeting all night because they aren't in this building. Congress, both the House and the Senate, have been out all week. You'll remember that before they left town, they couldn't agree on a sanctions package. The two main sticking points, of course, was putting Nord Stream 2 on ice and whether to whether to impose sanctions before or after Russia invaded. Both of those things now not a problem for when the Senate comes back into session on Monday, perhaps mulling over new legislation and new sanctions that they could enforce to back up Biden, to enforce his hand, as several senators told me before they left. You mentioned Senator Marco Rubio. He's a top Republican on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He's been tweeting minute by minute, moment by moment, things that are underway, attacks that Russia is planning and conducting against Ukraine. I confirmed a couple of hours ago from sources close to the situation that William Burns, the CIA director, actually spoke to Adam Schiff and spoke to Mark Warner, the heads of the Senate and House Intelligence Committee. So the members, though they are not here, staying very close to the situation. We've seen a lot of reaction, including forceful statements from Democrats who are on Biden's side, who wanted him to proceed carefully and tactfully with sanctions. Chris Murphy, who went to the region, Ukraine, a couple of weeks ago, saying that the world is on knife's edge. Now is the time to impose full sanctions, to release the full American and Western might against President Putin of Russia before we see potential harm being done against the U.S. as well. Cyber attacks. One of your guests was talking about that a couple of weeks ago. I was struck when relevant committee chairs emerged from a meeting briefed by administration officials saying that that is one of the things that they fear in the coming weeks that President Putin might do against the U.S. Now, as they return next week, we've heard sort of little bits and pieces of legislation and these odd pairings from Lindsey Graham to Senator Portman and Chris Murphy on certain things that they can do. Graham this week said very forcefully that he wants to see sanctions from hell next week when they get back into D.C., and there's no indication that they're going to come back any sooner. In fact, I'm told that there's going to be two briefings conducted by phone tomorrow from key administration officials, Anthony Blinken, Secretary Lloyd Austin, to the House and Senate, all members unclassified, of course, because it's over the phone, and they are not here, so we'll see what they learn tomorrow. Katie?
Julie Sorkin on the Capitol. Julie, thank you very much. And joining me now is Anna Shalis from Odessa. She's the Director of Security Programs at the Foreign Policy Council, Ukrainian PRISM, a Ukrainian think tank. Anna, thank you. We were talking just the other day about what would happen if Russia did choose to invade. It has chosen to invade. You are in Odessa. What have you heard this morning?
I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning from the sounds of the explosion, and as it's been confirmed a few hours later by the municipality, it's been the attempted attack by the missiles against the city, but the anti-missile system worked well, so the city were not touched. Unfortunately, right now we are receiving the information that it looks like the second attack being happen against the base of the National Guard, which is very close to the downtown, but we are waiting for the final confirmations what is happening on the ground. But Odessa region being attacked, the military base on the north of Odessa region being heavily shelled. We already have 6 people confirmed dead and 19 missing, plus several dozens at the hospitals heavy wounded. So that's really contradict dramatically to the phrases that currently the Russian TV is spreading, that this operation is just to protect the eastern territory that they recognized yesterday, because you can imagine that shelling in Odessa, which is something like 800 kilometers from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, or shells that just fall in the mid of Uman, that is town just in the mid of Ukraine. If you look to the map, just in the mid of the town, they received the strike and 1 civilian killed. That's definitely not the protection of any type of the territories or people that Russian president announced.
What can you tell us about this military base that it seems like they were targeting in Odessa?
With that base that we know confirmed, it is approximately 200 kilometers from Odessa, that is on the north. So you need to understand that Odessa region by size is something like Belgium. So it's one of the biggest in Ukraine and very long. But there it is completely destroyed. The video is already available. Journalists are working over there. So it was quite a heavy shelling of all the buildings and all the storages that they had. About Odessa, that is the National Guard. National Guard, it is the not military in this way. It is the part of the Ministry of Interior, but the militarized part that they're helping with the order in the country. However, they've been attacked as well, and we are expecting and carefully watching what is happening on the seaside. Because you understand that Odessa seaport is extremely important critical infrastructure place, and it's not only 70% of Ukrainian export going through it, but also it is the location for Ukrainian Navy.
How do you feel about the Ukrainian government's response? Do you feel confident in President Zelensky's leadership?
As for now, he is really behaving as people expecting, and for the last few days, nobody's complaining about his past or his actions. Luckily, he had very good Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense, plus the leadership of the armed forces. If you look to the recent polls that have been published just a few weeks ago, for example, but that is a normal picture of the last few years, Ukrainian armed forces have the highest level of confidence and support from all governmental structures in Ukraine. Up to 70% of Ukrainian civilians believe in their armed forces, and that is extremely important in such a crisis situations.
Do you have any information, any visibility as to what's happening on the ground in eastern Ukraine right now in the Donbass region? We've seen the explosions, we've heard the explosions in a number of cities across Kiev. We don't have any visibility right now about what is happening on the ground in those areas.
It depends which part of the contact line you're talking about, because the contact line between uncontrolled and controlled territories, we are speaking approximately about 600 kilometers. It's quite a long line. We know that the city of Shastya, it is in the Luhansk region, they were very heavy fighting there. The general staff just reported that they returned back this town to Ukrainian control. We know that they've been attacks to Mariupol and Berdyansk, that is at the Sea of Azov on the south, but cities are under Ukrainian control totally. As for now, their mayor just reported. And when we speak about the other towns, like, for example, Konstantinovka, it is a very big town just in the middle of that contact line. I just talked with my aunt. She is there, and she said that as for now, they are calm and looks as safe because at least the shellings are not happening around them. But they are preparing because they are very close to Donetsk.
What is your expectation about what is going to happen next in Odessa?
We see that all the services, the municipality, the people are on the high alert. So definitely we've been preparing for this for several weeks, all local authorities, all services. So we know that our security services are on the high alert as well. We are monitoring what is happening from air, from the sea, from the land, because don't forget that Ukrainian region, Odessa region, is also bordering Transnistria, another separatist district that's been under full control of the Russian Federation, and is part of Moldova, another sovereign state. So there they have approximately 1,500 of their forces plus military equipment, and our border services are currently on the high alert from that side as well.
When you saw Vladimir Putin speaking early this morning, your time, talking about denazifying Ukraine, what was your reaction?
You know, unfortunately, we're already used to these phrases from the Russian president. He became so obsessed because that makes the logic for him to make a parallels to the Second World War, because the events of the Second World War are very emotional for the Russian population, but I would say for all the population of the post-Soviet space. However, he's been manipulating with these notions for so long, and any type of Ukrainian patriotism or anti-Russian position, he always been presenting as any type of the Nazi ideas. But can you imagine the country where the president is Jew, where the Jewish community is extremely powerful and important, and in quite a multi-ethnic country that Ukraine is, speaking about Nazism as the state policy? That's definitely total nonsense. But as everything in the last statements from Mr. Putin, you know, he's playing with the history, not telling any real fate. He's just imagining it, and we feel something between Kafka and Orwell right now.
Anna Shalis, please come back and talk to us again about what is happening and what you are seeing. We do appreciate all of your time, and we do hope you stay safe. Let's bring in Colonel Mark Cansian, Senior Advisor with the CSIS International Security Program. Also, Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under the Obama administration. He's the president of Washington's Strategy Group. Joel, I want to start with you. I wonder, looking in hindsight about your time in the Obama administration, had Obama reacted more strongly to the annexation of Crimea, would this situation that we're in right now, could it have been avoided?
Look, Katie, it's great to be with you. And what's happening right now is an outrage. And what Vladimir Putin is doing is such a gross violation of international law, threatening nuclear weapons, which he did in his statement, speaking about denazification. And I'm so appreciative of Anna's statement. As an American Jew, I'm so deeply offended by the idea that he's using that argument against a Jewish leader, elected leader of Ukraine, that it's hard to imagine what would have worked at this moment. So in the Obama administration, the sanctions that were put in place were calibrated to stop him in his tracks, and it did, but it didn't roll him back, obviously. And that's the challenge that we're in, is that we have a leader in Vladimir Putin hell-bent on aggression. And we have fortified around him with military support to our allies, putting in these sanctions that are happening now and attempting to roll him back through international unity. But again, he is not listening to reason or diplomacy. And I just have to add, this goes back more than 2 decades. Even President Bush said he looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes, looked into his soul, basically. And so for more than 2 decades, American presidents have been trying to reason with him and push back. And now here we are, where he's showing his incredible true colors.
So are you saying that he's not someone that you can reason with? And I ask that because we are currently working with Russia in order to get the Iran nuclear deal back in place, which is a weird dichotomy, Joel.
It's a very strange dichotomy. And we've had nuclear agreements with Russia under his leadership, New START, in 2011, which reduced the level of nuclear warheads that we both maintain. And we have a history with the Soviet Union of having diplomacy while also competing. But this is different. And something is very perplexing about this moment, this argument that goes back further and deeper into Russian psyche, according to Vladimir Putin, about reestablishing spheres of influence, the sort of grievance of the loss of the Soviet Union. We've seen grievance politics before in Europe. Hitler had a grievance when Germany lost World War I, and he carried that with him into World War II. And so this is different. So, yes, we've been negotiating and engaging at multiple levels, and we have worked through those agreements, and they've been verifiable. But he has not taken it diplomatically into the level of questions of war and peace in any meaningful direction, certainly over the last recent years.
Joel, hang on. I want to ask you about sanctions, but to the general, there's this gap between. I'm sorry, the colonel. My apologies. There's this gap between the shelling that we saw this morning across Ukraine in multiple different cities, and now there's quiet. Why that flurry of action about 3 hours ago now, 4 hours ago now, and nothing?
Well, it's hard to say, but I expect that this air campaign is going to continue. My assumption is that it's a combination of missile attacks and airstrikes. Typically, these will go on for several days. We have a precedent in the U.S. Air campaigns against Iraq in 1991 and 2003. In those air campaigns, the strikes went on for a considerable amount of time. They started with air defense and air forces. And also command and control. And I think that's what you're seeing in Ukraine. That is attacks on air bases and some of the air defenses, very likely. And some of the attacks in Kiev. Kiev may well be against headquarters. A little hard to say, but these could go on for quite a while. And very often there's a respite while the Russians, in this case, do some reconnaissance and figure out, what effect their strikes had as they get ready for the next round of strikes.
The other question I have, and I'd like to pose it to you, is from what we've seen in the buildup of Russian forces around Ukraine, would they be able to hold portions of Ukraine, cities in Ukraine like Kiev, for any length of time with the assets they currently have in place?
Well, that's a great question, because the Russians have built a considerable force, but Ukraine is a very large country. Back in early 1943, when the Germans and Soviets faced off across essentially this front line, the Soviets had well over 1 million men. So it's not clear to me that they have the capability to take over the entire country or even the entire eastern region, particularly if there's a strong Ukrainian resistance. I think they're going to have to focus their efforts in a couple of places.
Joel, I do want to ask you again about sanctions. Do you believe that the sanctions that the president is going to announce today, should they be the whole fleet of the sanctions, or should he be holding some back?
Yeah, this is the moment, Katie, for the whole fleet. This is the moment where the heavy punishing sanctions that have been prepared along with our allies, and the crucial dynamic here is making sure that the allies are on board with this, but that these sanctions go forward aggressively and that we move into the dynamic of export controls, following on really watching, cutting out Russia from the global financial system in a meaningful, impactful way, hurting the oligarchs around Vladimir Putin, and making sure the Russian people understand that they are being punished for Vladimir Putin's actions.
Joel Rubin and Colonel Mark Kansian, thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate it. And coming up after a very short break, we are going to reset, give you everything we know about what is happening right now. Again, a live picture of what it's like in Kiev as it appears hundreds, if not thousands, of Kiev residents flee the city.
What does her ascension mean to you?
Ask a simple question.
We think she is the first woman of color vice president.
Ask everyone you know what matters to them and why.
Let's be clear. This isn't about fraud.
Favor facts over conspiracies.
The facts and the history are instructive.
And trust standards over hearsay.
Get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
These days, a big part of the appeal of the conservative movement is the transgressive thrill of being a jerk, of being cruel, of mocking people and deriding them when they are in pain or suffering or having a problem. When you build a political movement whose emotional core is transgression and cruelty, ultimately no one is safe from that kind of treatment. So what kind of governance will that lead to the next time that these folks get power?
Keep up with what matters. Keep up with Chris. All In with Chris Hayes. Weeknights at 8 on MSNBC.
When you need brutal honesty.
These conspiracy theories are not only making people stupid, they're making them sick.
When you need answers first thing in the morning.
What's the key to progress to bringing this home and getting this deal done?
What is the military posture of the United States now toward Afghanistan?
You need your Morning Joe, only on MSNBC.
You know, there's an old saying, you only live once. It's usually passed down through a generational advice from a drunk uncle at a barbecue. You only live once. No, you only die once. You live every day, right? And I'm gonna choose to live my life like that.
I'm going to take a lot of messages away from today, but you only die once. You live every day. I have a lot of years in TV, and that is the best advice I've heard. John, thanks for everything, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
John Thiel is the president of the Feel Good Foundation.
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism, but when the school board presented its plan, it ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory
Racism in reverse.
False narrative.
Shame.
This is Southlake. All episodes available now.
One bill would eliminate the requirement that students be taught the, quote, history of white supremacy, including but not limited to the institution of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. American history is littered with shameful policies, but it is also filled with freedom fighters. To teach our children anything else is to rob them of their heritage and the truth, and they deserve better.
We're
back now from Las Vegas.
Seattle, Guatemala City.
From Wilmington.
I was in space in Texas. From Normandy,
From
France.
Surfside, Florida. Thank you for watching, everyone.
Good morning. It is 4 a.m. in New York and 11 a.m. in Kiev, Ukraine. And here is what we know right now. We are hours into the Russian air assault on Ukraine. This morning, missiles targeted at least 4 cities. The country is now under a state of martial law. Fear is gripping Ukraine. Large crowds of people were seen outside of the central train station in Kiev carrying suitcases. And the highway, as we have been showing you, is at a standstill with hundreds, if not thousands of people trying to flee to the west, away from Russia's border. This mass exodus is underway despite pleas from the government for people to stay home. And from Kiev to the embattled port city of Mariupol, where our crews captured long lines at ATMs. Joining me now is NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin. She's in Kiev, Ukraine. So, Erin, I'm curious about the Ukrainian government. Where is President Zelensky right now? Where are his senior leaders? What are they saying to Ukraine's people?
Yeah, well, a few hours ago, I managed to reach President Zelensky's spokesperson. I pressed him on where exactly the president is right now. He would not respond to that. The last we heard from President Zelensky was in the form of a video message that was posted to social media in which he was appealing to the people here to remain calm and appealing to the military, essentially, to fight for their country. This, as people here are terrified. They are hiding in the metro stations, pictures distributed of women and children seen crouching sort of in the corners, seeking shelter as the air sirens rang out this morning. We're seeing long lines at ATMs, traffic jam to leave the city to the western portion of the country, which is seen as safer. But really at this point, all eyes are on the Sankivka border crossing, which is the intersection between Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. According to an advisor to the interior minister, some 50 tanks were seen crossing that border. And that's significant because that border crossing is about a 3.5-4 hour drive away from the capital. And that's for a regular car. Obviously, for a tank, it would take longer than that. We've been trying to reach out to government officials, asking what the Ukrainian military is going to do to respond, asking for where they think those tanks are going. We have yet to hear a reply. This, as we're beginning to learn the damage from those strikes that happened in the small hours of the morning, missile strikes, according to an official from the Interior Ministry, striking airfields and military installations. An advisor to the mayor of Kiev forwarded me pictures, still images of what he says is a military base that was struck by missiles in the overnight hours. As people here are beginning to survey the damage and prepare for the worst, President Zelensky has declared martial law for the whole of Ukraine, and now they are in the process, according to the Ministry of Defense, of distributing small arms, guns, to regular civilians to be able to defend themselves. Katie.
Erin McLaughlin. Erin, thank you so much. Quite a scene there. Let's bring in Wall Street Journal Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Yaroslav Trofimov. Yaroslav is also in Kiev, Ukraine. And Yaroslav, I see you are on the streets right now. Tell me what you're experiencing.
Well, people are out in the streets again. The big lines in the shopping centers. People are stocking up on food, on water, on essentials, on cigarettes. As the realization that the war has started is beginning to sink in. On the main street of Kiev, there are now signing up tents where people are being signed up to join the territorial defense. There is meant to repel a Russian invasion. And other than that, restaurants, coffee shops, they're all bustling, and food of people yesterday now are empty.
Yaroslav, can you, do us a favor? Can you show us around a little bit? Can you talk to somebody for us? Not to put you on the spot, but it would be interesting.
As you can see, everybody coming in behind me is coming out with big shopping bags. That's a big supermarket here, and people are stocking up, carrying all they can.
Is there a sense of fear there right now? Is there a sense of Do people want to sign up and fight for their country out there?
Well, some definitely do. Others, obviously, are have to care for the families, for the children, and so a lot of others are trying to flee to the western part of the country. But a great many are going to stay here in Kiev, and they just, the ATMs are still working. There are small lines around ATMs, but people are still able to get cash out. And there haven't been any airstrikes in this city since for about 3 or 4 hours. So people are cautiously venturing out and going by their lives.
Is there an expectation that they're going to see tanks rolling into the city? Aaron was just talking about the tanks that were rolling over the border from Belarus, about a 3-4 hour drive. That was about 3 hours ago. Obviously, tanks move slower, so it will take some time. But do people expect to see Russian tanks in Kiev?
Well, I mean, the Ukrainian army says it is resisting, and there are defenses on the way to Kiev. It's a big city. It's not going to be that easy to just take it. What we have seen is that security forces protecting the parliament, protecting the government installations, that yesterday were just, wearing normal uniforms. Today have full body armor, helmets, and semi-automatic rifles. So it clearly is a city on a war footing now, and the mood is completely different from what it was just yesterday.
Ukraine has called up its reserved, and it's quite a wide age range, 18 to 60 years old. Have you met anybody who's been conscripted?
Yes, we have talked to people who have been conscripted. Obviously, a lot of the people were called up in this first wave by people who are veterans of this 8-year war against pro-Russian forces in the eastern Donbass region. So that the people with actual combat experience who are going to who know what they're going to be doing.
Yaroslav, I don't know how long you've been in Ukraine, but what can you tell me about what happened for a month?
Yes.
Okay, I got it. But you are the chief foreign affairs correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. What can you tell me about the way that Ukraine reacted to the ousting of the pro-Russian president back in 2014, and what that could mean for how Ukraine and Kiev is going to react to the Russians today?
Well, there is very little support for Russia, and especially President Putin here in Kiev. And, back then in 2014, the president who decided to align Ukraine with Russia was ousted by really a popular uprising. There were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets protesting against him. Obviously, it's very different when we're dealing with aviation and tanks. But Ukrainian forces have received weapons such as anti-tank missiles from the U.S. that could be very useful, especially in an urban environment. And in the cities, the Air Force, in which Russia has an advantage, especially after targeting Ukrainian airfields this morning, that advantage is somewhat offset by the urban environment. So that would probably be the defense strategy of the Ukrainians.
Our colleague Aaron McLaughlin, or my colleague Aaron McLaughlin, was reporting earlier about the bomb shelters, and that Kiev has been, or Ukraine has been working as quickly as it can to dust off some of the bomb shelters, which many of them are located in the underground stations in Kiev. Have you seen people using them this morning?
I mean, the way some people go into the underground stations, those underground stations were built in the Soviet times to withstand a nuclear strike. They're very deep underground. It's not like the New York subway. But, there haven't been any airstrikes in built-up areas in Kiev so far. And so, as long as these airstrikes and missile strikes are confined to military installations on the edge of the city, people, don't feel the need to be in bomb shelters just yet.
Ukraine Parliament passed a law to allow its citizens to carry guns in public. They passed this yesterday. Have you seen anything like that?
Ukrainians already own guns. There's about 700,000 Ukrainians who have registered firearms, in a population of 40 million. So there's plenty of weapons around, also plenty of unlicensed firearms that made their way here from the Donbass conflict area. But now the Ukrainian defense minister said this morning that any citizen who wishes to do so can just go to local military unit and get weapons as part of this territorial defense force that Ukraine is standing up to protect its cities.
Can I ask you a personal question? What do you plan on doing?
Sure.
How are you going to stay safe?
We'll see it hour by hour, I guess.
Spoken like a journalist. We'll see it hour by hour. Yaroslav Trofimov, thank you so much for joining us,
Thank
and
you.
do stay safe. Let's bring in Oksana Surayed, Vice President of the Kiev School of Economics. And I do apologize if I mangled your last name, Oksana. Tell us...
You did great. Thank you.
Okay, good. Tell us, frankly, how are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling quite confident and calm because I was raised during all my life in understanding that Russia is an enemy, and that eventually, even after the independence, they will fight us. And my grandma told me in 2005 that there will be the war, Russia will never give up. So I've been preparing to this probably all my life. That's why I understand that I have to fight this war.
What are you going to do? Are you going to stay? Are you going to take up arms? Do you have a family out there? And how do you plan on keeping them safe?
Well, I have the family cottage on the western part of Ukraine in the countryside, but I'm not going to plan. Not going to use it. I don't plan it. I plan to stay in Kiev as long as I can, and I think I will be safe because, well, I've been dealing with the security area in Ukraine and globally for almost a decade. I've been a vice speaker of Ukrainian parliament during previous convocation and one of the leader of the defense, global defense agenda for Ukraine. I've been one of those who've been standing strongly against Minsk agreements as it's supposed to be a threat. And actually, I was the one who was warning European American leadership for years that it's going to be a big war. And unfortunately, that this war was unavoidable because everybody was actually blind and in denial because people didn't want to, the establishment, political establishment, they just didn't want to see the approach of this war. So in principle, now I'm going to do what I can do the best way. I'm helping now the territorial defense, the command of territorial defense. I'm also doing a lot of stuff, working together with local communities to keep them calm, to give them information. So I'm prepared to do whatever I can do best for this certain moment.
Let's talk about sanctions. President Biden is going to announce a new tranche of sanctions later today. What do you want to hear from him?
Of course, the sanctions are very important because this is something that can actually deter and contain Russian aggression. So the sanctions had to be extremely severe because we see that Russia is going to deploy a lot of force just to keep Ukraine under control. So it should be, well, it's not my particular business to tell what to do, but in principle, I understand that it should be disconnection from SWIFT. It should be severe sanctions on Russian financial system. So something that would disconnect Russia from the world and from the opportunity to continue the aggression.
How is Ukraine going to be able to handle the economic fallout? We saw lines of people lining up at ATMs trying to take their money out of the banking system. Here's a video of it right now. There are economic effects to conflict beyond this, global economic effects. Is Ukraine going to be okay?
We see natural reaction of people, and of course, except of the targets like of military infrastructure that Putin set for himself. The specific target and very important target is our calmness, yes, and our self-esteem and our feeling of dignity and our trust in our institutions. So, of course, when people first they woke up, I woke up actually with understanding that Russian missiles are attacking not specifically Kiev, but military infrastructure around Kiev. So the first reaction is actually to run away and to take money and to take food and to go as far as you can. But in principle, Russia is surrounding Ukraine, so the attacks are taking place actually around the border. And the critical infrastructure, the airports are targeted even in on the far western Ukraine, in Ivano-Frankivsk and in Luhansk, from the territory of Belarus. So in principle, that's what I'm telling people. There is no place to run and there is no place to hide. So I mean, we have to be calm. This is the calmness today is our weapon, you know, and being ready to stay. And next, after this natural reaction of panic, of course, what Russia expects, what Putin expects, that should be chaos because people should abandon their houses, and then the bans can come, then the protests can start. So and the target in this case is the regime, the government, the institutions of Ukraine. So that's why I think that the first wave, natural wave, of course, of natural reaction of human being to hide from the threat and to secure. After this wave, people will a lot of people will come back to Kiev, and a lot of, even though they stay, a lot of people stay. I'm living right on the highway that goes to the west, so I can see the cars that are heading to the west. But I'm sure that a lot of them will come back, and those who stay will be prepared to maintain the order in the city.
Yeah, we've seen those lines. They are long. There's gridlock. But Oksana Sarid, you are staying. Thank you so much for joining us, and we do wish you well.
Thank you.
And coming up, we want to take you back into Russia to show you how the invasion is playing. We have top lines from morning television in Moscow. Stay with us.
There's an assault on democracy.
Scorching triple-digit heat. The new space race begins.
That is actually the potential America has always had.
The change might be around the corner.
Did you get a sense of what the end game is here?
What would happen in ranked choice voting?
That's just not what the facts are.
3 former intelligence officials said there's no way.
That's the heart of the matter, right?
The highly contagious Delta variant of COVID-19 was first discovered in India. Variants can develop anywhere in the world, especially in countries with the lowest vaccination rates. Providing vaccines to the world is not an act of pure generosity. It is an act of self-defense that is necessary to help protect Americans from the spread of future variants.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 on MSNBC.
Whether it's the politics of climate change, the effects of marijuana laws, or the challenges of racial injustice, get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust, like Alicia Menendez, Mehdi Hassan, and Frank Figluzzi, along with a growing list of experts offering their insights. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
When you need brutal honesty.
These conspiracy theories are not only making people stupid, they're making them sick.
When you need answers first thing in the morning.
What's the key to progress to bringing this home and getting this deal done?
When you need to go deep inside Washington.
What is the military posture of the United States now toward Afghanistan?
And hear from someone who's been there.
Perhaps the greatest threat to American democracy right now is misinformation that's being spread around.
You need your Morning Joe, only on MSNBC.
Controversy in South Lake tonight after teens posted a racist video.
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism.
My children were told Rosa Parks is dead. You all have to sit in the back of the bus.
But when the school board presented its plan, this small town fight ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory.
Racism in reverse.
False narrative of rampant racism.
Shame.
This is South Lake, an NBC News podcast. All episodes available now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Still to come on the Channel 2 News. Well, the waters are certainly receding now.
Still too close to call.
Lester Holt reporting from
Ground Zero, as it's being referred to.
It is, in fact, a taste of freedom.
The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency.
What's the biggest risk right now?
Some of the troops who have been proud. I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You with some resilient folks. Let me get a hint.
One bill would eliminate the requirement that students be taught the, quote, history of white supremacy, including but not limited to the institution of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. American history is littered with shameful policies, but it is also filled with freedom fighters. To teach our children anything else is to rob them of their heritage and the truth, and they deserve better.
Get your daily dose of written perspectives about the issues that matter most. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
We're back now from Las Vegas.
Seattle,
Guatemala City.
From Wilmington.
I was in space in Texas. From Normandy,
From
France.
Surfside, Florida. Thank you for watching, everyone.
And joining me now is NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley, who is in Kharkiv, Ukraine. So, Matt, what are you hearing about reports of tanks rolling near Kharkiv?
Yeah, well, we've been seeing some images on social media showing Russian tanks on the outskirts of this city. And again, this is only about 25 miles from the Russian border, so it's no surprise that they would make it here so quickly. We haven't yet started seeing them here in the center of the city. But we have gotten some reports from the Ukrainian military. The general staff of the armed forces says 4 tanks were burned on the bypass road to Kharkiv, and that 50 Russian soldiers were killed in the area of a town that's called Happiness. And also that another plane of the armed forces of the Russian Federation was destroyed near the town of Kramatorsk. And that makes 5 total that the Ukrainians, of Russian planes that the Ukrainians have shot down. But Katie, I got to tell you, we're only hearing reports so far from the Ukrainian military. We have no sense of what the Russians are saying. So if you only listen to the Ukrainians, it sounds as though they're winning this fight. And I have to say, I find that very unlikely since we haven't gotten a full report. We need to be careful about trying to get more information from the Russians. But at this point, we are looking at this battle through a peephole provided to us by the Ukrainian military. So it's just impossible for us to make a fair assessment of the battle. If some of those videos that are coming out on TikTok of social media of Russian tanks and Russian armored personnel carriers just slowly, gently lumbering through the countryside outside of Kharkiv are true, it makes it seem as though they are moving through this countryside unresisted. And that would be, a very interesting part of this battle, showing that they were moving very, very quickly through the countryside and through this city, or around this city. We also have seen almost no one on the streets, as I reported to you earlier, except for a massive police presence that has fanned out all over town. And it's hard to see how the police would put up much of a resistance to the Russian army. I believe they're probably out there to prevent people from looting and taking advantage of the chaos.
You know, it is hard to have eyes on what's happening. We're so used to social media now. We're so used to seeing everything in real time. But given the amount of disinformation and misinformation that's out there, especially surrounding this conflict, it's hard to see what's real and what's not if it hasn't been verified by an official source. I do find it interesting, Matt, that we're hearing these snippets from the Ukrainian government about their quote-unquote wins on the battlefield, the tanks that they've taken out, the helicopters they've shot down. It's what do you make of their selective release of information?
I mean, look, Katie, maybe it's true. Maybe those are all major victories for the Ukrainian military. Maybe the Russians haven't gained anything at all. I highly, highly doubt that that's the case, given the lopsided nature of this conflict and given the very frank comments that I've heard from former and current defense officials. It just doesn't seem likely that this battle is going in the way that we're hearing about it from the Ukrainians, especially if, given the fact that this opened with a pummeling from the air all across the country, in cities like here, in Kharkiv, and in Kiev, the capital, and far south in Odessa. But it's just impossible to check on this stuff. I mean, the Ukrainians have said that they've seen what must be a dramatic amphibious landing of Russian troops to the south in Odessa, just around the Crimea area that was annexed by Russia back in 2014. If the Russians have managed to make a daring amphibious landing in Odessa, it's hard to imagine that the Ukrainians have the upper hand, even though they keep saying over and over again in these reports that we are defending ourselves, we're doing a good job, we're beating back the invaders. I just don't see it. Maybe I'll believe it in a couple of days if we get a real sense of how the battlefield looks and reports from the Russians. That's what we need to get a real sense.
Well, we have some idea of what the Russians are reporting right now. Matt Bradley, thank you very much. Let's go to NBC News producer Matt Bodner in Moscow. Matt, we have some headlines from Russian TV this morning. Russia 24, breaking defense ministry. The Border Guard Service of Ukraine does not show resistance. Breaking defense ministry, servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine are leaving their positions en masse. Breaking, servicemen of the armed forces of Ukraine abandon their weapons. Military targets are hit with precision, it's early, weapons. That's a lot different from what we're hearing from Ukraine, as Matt Bradley just reported.
That's right, Katie. We're hearing basically counterclaims to everything we've been hearing from the Ukrainian defense ministry. And it's interesting because they're really very much trying to capture a certain narrative here on this operation. Remember, this began with a very early morning declaration from Vladimir Putin of a special military operation, essentially amounting to a kind of liberation of Ukraine, but don't call it war. You're not hearing that anywhere in the Russian media. They're being very selective about how they're presenting this on state media. You know, here's we're watching a talk show on one of the Russian state channels saying things like, very soon Russian forces will leave Ukraine. Ukrainians will be able to freely choose their own leadership. Again, reiterating that Ukrainian soldiers are abandoning their positions en masse. And that they're also saying, they're claiming that the Russian military is giving Ukrainian soldiers the opportunity to surrender before being fired on, but also denials that Ukraine has taken out any Russian aircraft, killed any Russian soldiers, or destroyed any Russian tanks. So they're trying to paint this domestically as a very clean, surgical operation that is costing nothing. That is an important thing to pay attention to as this moves forward. We're not sure about the accuracy of what we're hearing from the Ukrainians, likewise for the Russians. And they are going, I think, to try to make this look as cheap as possible. I want to also flag something else that's come up. We were talking earlier kind of about this sense that maybe not everyone's on board with this, but who might actually speak up against this. Alexei Navalny, the arrested opposition leader, just so happens to be in court today on another trial that presumably, when he's found guilty, will add up to 15 years to his term, used his opportunity on the stand to say this, and you won't see this on the Russian state media, but what few independent outlets are left are carrying it. He says, quote, "I'm against this war. I believe that this war between Russia and Ukraine has been unleashed to cover up the robbery of Russian citizens and distract their attention from the problems that exist inside this country, from the degradation of the economy. This war will lead to a huge number of victims, ruined destinies, and the continuation of the impoverishment of Russian citizens." And he continues to say that what we're seeing now basically proves everything he's ever said about the Russian government. So there's a voice for you, Katie.
Just to be clear, in case you looked at your screen and you saw President Zelensky, Matt Bodnar was talking about Alexei Navalny, the Russian dissident who was in court this morning. That's what he was saying about Russia. We are showing you President Zelensky of Ukraine. He is in Kiev right now. He is addressing the Ukrainian people. He is speaking in Ukrainian. And once we get a translation on what he is saying, we're going to bring that to you. So just give us a moment to get that translation. Matt Bodnar, what about imagery? You know, we're hearing these headlines. What sort of imagery is being shown in Russia right now?
Very little. Very little imagery being shown from any of this. We've seen.
Well, what do you make of that? And I ask you that because we've seen. I'm sorry to interrupt. We've seen a ton of Russian imagery about their troop buildup. All of the video that we have comes from Russian defense. Why are we not seeing so much now?
It's an interesting question. I suppose I don't really know the answer. I think one reason, one easy reason is that the state media doesn't want to show what's actually happening in this operation because I just find it hard to believe that this is happening without any casualties or losses to the Russian side at all. And this is something that Russians are very, very sensitive to, you know, because this is a conversation we've been having for a long time at various points. They're very casual, you know, very casualty averse. Naturally, all people are, all societies are. But there's always strong kind of imagery, kind of memories of the war in Afghanistan, the Soviet war in Afghanistan, also the wars in Chechnya as well. So there is definitely a clear effort to not show any kind of loss of life, that this is a bloody conflict, especially when so many Russians do consider Ukrainians to be brotherly people. They see them as one. And so they will be sensitive to those images if they come up. But also, you know, we know that we saw in the buildup that there were things that the Russians were bringing to the table, such as some pretty advanced electronic warfare kits. So it's possible we're seeing jamming in some of the areas where this stuff's happening. But I have to be clear, I just don't know why we're not seeing, for example, TikToks.
That is the power
from these areas.
That is the power of controlling state media. You can show what you want to show. And again, we're just hearing headlines. Ukraine does not show resistance and the like. Matt Bodnar in Moscow. Matt, thank you so much. And we're going to take a really quick break. Again, we're getting dueling information from Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine talking about their successes on the battlefield, talking about the tanks that they've disabled, the helicopters they've shot down. Meanwhile, again, in Russia, it's all about how Ukraine is showing no resistance, laying down their arms, fleeing their positions. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
What does her ascension mean to you?
Ask a simple question.
Everything. She is the first woman of color vice president.
Ask everyone you know what matters to them.
Where do we go from here?
Ask the why.
Why?
Why is this happening?
The hows.
How did you get your politics?
Please back.
The wait a minute.
Okay.
Be tough on the answers.
It was deliberate deceit.
Favor facts over conspiracies and trust standards over hearsay.
The highly contagious Delta variant of COVID-19 was first discovered in India. Variants can develop anywhere in the world, especially in countries with the lowest vaccination rates. Providing vaccines to the world is not an act of pure generosity. It is an act of self-defense that is necessary to help protect Americans from the spread of future variants.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 on MSNBC.
Whether it's the politics of climate change, the effects of marijuana laws, or the challenges of racial injustice. Get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust, like Alicia Menendez, Mehdi Hassan, and Frank Figluzzi. along with a growing list of experts offering their insights. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
One bill would eliminate the requirement that students be taught the, quote, history of white supremacy, including but not limited to the institution of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. American history is littered with shameful policies, but it is also filled with freedom fighters. To teach our children anything else is to rob them of their heritage and the truth, and they deserve better.
When you need brutal honesty.
These conspiracy theories are not only making people stupid, they're making them sick.
When you need answers first thing in the morning.
What's the key to progress to bringing this home and getting this deal done?
When you need to go deep inside Washington.
What is the military posture of the United States now toward Afghanistan?
And hear from someone who's been there.
Perhaps the greatest threat to American democracy right now is misinformation that's being spread around.
You need your Morning Joe, only on MSNBC.
Controversy in Southlake tonight after teens posted a racist video.
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism.
My children were told Rosa Parks is dead. You all have to sit in the back of the bus.
But when the school board presented its plan, this small town fight ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory. Racism in reverse.
False narrative of rampant racism.
Shame.
This is Southlake, an NBC News podcast. All episodes available now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Still to come on the Channel 2 News. Well, the waters are certainly receding now.
Still too close to call. Lester Holt reporting from
Ground Zero, as it's being referred to.
It is, in fact, a taste of freedom. The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency. What's the biggest risk right now? Some of the troops who have been proud. I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You with some resilient folks. Let me get a hint.
When you need brutal honesty.
These conspiracy theories are not only making people stupid, they're making them sick.
When you need answers first thing in the morning.
What's the key to progress to bringing this home and getting this deal done?
What is the military posture of the United States now toward Afghanistan?
You need your Morning Joe, only on MSNBC.
It is now a little past 4:30 a.m. in New York, 11:30 a.m. in Kiev, Ukraine. Ukrainian's President Zelensky just addressed his country for the first time since the Russian air assault began. He asked people to spread honest information and said he will issue weapons to anyone who wants them. Meanwhile, the fear is very clear in the capital city of Kiev. There is gridlock on the highways with hundreds, if not thousands, of people trying to get out after a round of explosions rattled the city this morning. And this is the scene in the port city of Mariupol in eastern Ukraine. You can see long lines of people waiting to get cash out of the ATM. We've also learned of the first casualties. A bombing killed 6 people in the region of Odessa in southwestern Ukraine. 7 people are wounded and 19 more are missing. In response to the attacks, Ukraine's president ordered martial law, closing schools and placing hospitals on high alert. And Ukraine's defense minister wants, quote, anyone who is ready and able to hold a weapon to join the country's defense forces. As for the United States response, President Biden will meet with G7 leaders later this morning to impose severe sanctions on Russia. President Biden will also address this nation later this afternoon. Let us bring in Natalia Humenyuk. She is a Ukrainian journalist in Kiev. So President Zelensky just spoke. He says the enemy has suffered serious losses, clearly trying to boost morale in Ukraine, also telling people that anyone who wants a weapon should come get one. What do you make of his address?
So first of all, I should probably say that it was not his first address. He's been addressing every single hour with a short remarks since, the very moment of the attacks. That was quite expected. There were a lot of other things. The president called people stay home and those who want to fight. I heard your previous discussion and also should say I'm in Kiev. I'm talking to the people all over the country. Indeed, the attack is immense. It's all over the border, which is 2,000 kilometers long, and there are also civilians casualties. But in terms of the defense, it's not that what we expect. It's something we expected, to be honest. It's something which Ukrainian military told. So the primary targets were the military targets, warehouses, and it's not really you can defend them with the ground troops. We know that some of the air defense system worked, and yes, there should be some ground troops moving over the border. Still, for all these hours, while reporting, listening to the people also in the conflict line, we know that some cities are shelled, but we cannot say that Ukraine doesn't resist. It does. Overall, I feel there is some, like the authorities are largely in control. Of course, people are shocked because this should be a shocking event for the whole world because there is no reason for this war. It's madness. So we see how the people proceed. But subway works, some shops works, school kids are not called to go to the schools, but hospital works, all that, like electricity, power, water, it's all there. And again, I should say, we're speaking about the country which is as big as France. So if there are airstrikes in different places, we also understand for different reporters, it's very hard to imagine what's happening in a different part of the country.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we do have reporters stationed throughout the country. But again, we're not getting every indication about what is happening because, as you said, the country is so large. And our apologies, that's the first indication that we've gotten of President Zelensky addressing the nation. But thank you for keeping us honest on that. What can you tell us about the reporting currently from the front lines in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine? We've gotten, reports from the Ukrainian government talking about taking down helicopters, disabling tanks. We're also hearing from the Russian government that Ukrainians are laying down their weapons, they're abandoning their posts, that Russia's meeting no resistance. What can you tell us about the reporting that's coming out of there?
That's definitely not true. We can't really, show, like who is winning. It's still happening. We know about a couple of towns which were claimed to be taken, and they are tiny, but they were not. We're also cautious because, for instance, there were announcements about the Marines in Odessa and in Mariupol, and it turned not true. So the resistance exactly in the front line is there. The officials said about possible casualties. Of course, it's up to them to keep, let's say, not really bravado, but they said that it's there, but it's not that Ukraine answered. That should be the part of the strategy. But talking to different people, there is no doubt that they are really, really fighting back.
Okay, so in your estimation, I know the government has said that anybody who wants a weapon can get a weapon. I know that they've called up reservists between the ages of 18 to 60, which is a wide range. And they've also said to individual citizens that you are going to need to fight, that this is a war that all of Ukraine must wage. And I'm paraphrasing there. What is your sense of the Ukrainian people and their willingness outside of the military to wage this war?
So, look, over the last days and months, there were polls where more than 50% of Ukrainians were ready to resist. Then the figures were growing up to 60. And just given an example, this week, at the moment when when there was this recognition of these quasi-republics, at that particular day, the Ukrainians gathered, just Ukrainians for one NGO supporting army gathered $600,000. That's how that's what they do. And the people just want to understand what they can do. There was no still kind of a large call to the army or conscription. So if there is a moment, it is a moment. But it's not, I know the people who are ready, that would be including women, but it's not a call upon everybody. Yet it feels like there would be enough of people to do so. What is the feeling toward the West right now within Ukraine? Oh, the question is, the President Zelensky said for a lot of time, he listed a number of the foreign leaders who say, whom he's spoken to. I think that there would be always a question, there should be more. People are speaking about the, no-fly zone over Ukraine, so the US jets, the Russian jets won't be there, or drones. But there are calls for tougher sanctions, for, all the support in the defense and in the financial support, humanitarian support. So the calls are there. I don't know how to assess, is it enough? I've seen a lot, words of support from a lot of people globally, including the politicians, but I think the actions are already, I know it takes like hours probably to develop these actions, but we were preparing for this. We were announced that it might happen for quite a long time. And there is a hope that if there was a plan, could it be enforced already now?
Do the Ukrainian people still want to join the EU? Do they want to be a part of NATO? What's the feeling toward more closely aligning themselves with the West?
Yeah, look, it's very strange to ask for the people after 4 hours of the, one of the probably most horrible events of our decades. What do they think of NATO? But it's like, I feel that the people have the huge solidarity. They are even more clear about, that it's not a hoax. It's not just a theoretical threat of Russian attack. And there is the only way to defend itself is being in NATO. It's not, of course, a moment, where you really discuss that, but the support was growing. And what I now feel while talking to people, they are becoming more and more determined.
Very interesting. Natalia Humaniuk, thank you so much for joining us, and we do wish you well.
Bye.
We're going to take a very quick break. Stay with us. We have Peter Baker when we come back.
Lots of expert help lined up tonight to help us get through the news.
We know other people were involved.
They're now going to debate it again and vote again.
We have to be very, very precise.
What he did today was word perfect.
These days, a big part of the appeal of the conservative movement is the transgressive thrill of being a jerk, of being cruel, of mocking people and deriding them when they are in pain or suffering or having a problem. When you build a political movement whose emotional core is transgression and cruelty, ultimately no one is safe from that kind of treatment. So what kind of governance will that lead to the next time that these folks get power?
Keep up with what matters. Keep up with Chris. All In with Chris Hayes. Weeknights at 8 on MSNBC.
Get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust, like Alicia Menendez, Mehdi Hassan, and Frank Figluzzi, along with a growing list of experts offering their insights. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
There's an old saying, you only live once. It's usually passed down to a generational advice from a drunk uncle at a barbecue. You only live once. No, you only die once. You live every day, right? And I'm gonna choose to live my life like that.
I'm going to take a lot of messages away from today, but you only die once. You live every day. I have
right.
a lot of years in TV, and that is the best advice I've heard. John, thanks for everything, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
John Thiel is the president of the Feel Good Foundation.
One bill would eliminate the requirement that students be taught the, quote, history of white supremacy, including but not limited to the institution of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. American history is littered with shameful policies, but it is also filled with freedom fighters. To teach our children anything else is to rob them of their heritage and the truth, and they deserve better.
When you need answers first thing in the morning, when you need to go deep inside Washington and hear from someone who's been there.
Perhaps the greatest threat to American democracy right now is misinformation that's being spread around.
You need your Morning Joe.
Controversy in South Lake tonight after teens posted a racist video.
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism.
My children were told Rosa Parks is dead. You all have to sit in the back of the bus.
But when the school board presented its plan, this small town fight ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory.
Racism in reverse. False narrative of rampant racism.
This is South Lake, an NBC News podcast. All episodes available now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Still to come on the Channel 2 News. Well, the waters are certainly receding now.
Still too close to call.
Lester Holt reporting from the
Ground Zero, as it's being referred to.
It is, in fact, a taste of freedom. The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency. What's the biggest risk right now? Some of the troops who have been proud. I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You with some resilient folks. Let me get a hint.
What does her ascension mean to you?
Ask a simple question.
We think she is the first woman of color vice president.
Ask everyone you know what matters to them and why.
Let's be clear. This isn't about fraud.
Favor facts over conspiracies.
The facts and the history are instructive.
And trust standards over hearsay. Get your daily dose of written perspectives about the issues that matter most. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
Call now.
Let's bring in NBC News investigative reporter Dan DeLuce. So, Dan, you've been watching the military movements. What is the risk here for a miscalculation?
Hopefully remote, but it can't be ruled out. You have a very serious firepower now being unleashed by Russia, long-distance missiles, aircraft, and you have U.S. forces very nearby in Poland and in Romania and in the Baltic countries. And so as this conflict unfolds, we don't know how it will evolve. And there is the possibility of some kind of misunderstanding, especially given the really tense nature and the distrust now, the nature of bad relations now between Moscow and the West. So there is that possibility of some kind of incident. But at the moment, of course, there are no U.S. or NATO troops in Ukraine. And at the moment, the war is contained inside Ukraine. But you can't rule out some kind of misunderstanding or miscalculation as this unfolds.
You know, what we're looking at right now is some of the damage in Kiev, and that appears to be the remains of a missile. Dan, you tell me, you know this stuff better than I do.
Well, this is what the U.S. and other governments were predicting, that Russia would come down hard like a hammer with all its missile arsenal and its artillery and all sorts of firepower it has arrayed all around the border of Ukraine to kind of damage and inflict a heavy toll on Ukraine's military before they even move in with a large number of land forces. And the biggest risk, I think, at the moment for Ukraine's military is so many of their troops are lined up in the east on that front line for the past 8 years. And there is a risk now that Russia, through this air raids and bombing raids, could then swoop in from the west and the north and trap the Ukrainian military there on that front line in the east and possibly capture them. So a real big, dangerous moment now for the Ukrainian armed forces.
Dan DeLuce, Dan, thank you so much. Let's go now to New York Times Chief White House Correspondent Peter Baker. Peter, it is just a few minutes now before 5 a.m. Much of Washington, if they got any sleep last night, is starting to wake up. What are you going to be watching out for as this day unfolds?
Well, I think the first thing anybody in Washington is going to watch for, of course, is President Biden and how he handles this. He issued written statements last night. He spoke with President Zelensky by phone, but we haven't seen him in person yet. I think he plans to come out around midday after consulting with the other leaders of the group of 7 G7 nations. This is a big test for him. This is a huge challenge to the international order, and it's up to President Biden as sort of the leader of the free world. There's a phrase we didn't used to have to use the last few years, but now as a leader of the free world, try to rally a global response to this unprovoked aggression. It's reminiscent of days back in the end of the Cold War when Iraq violated Kuwait's sovereignty, invaded Kuwait. President Bush then rallied the world against that kind of aggression and forced Iraq back. Today, we don't have the Soviet Union on our side the way we did then. Russia is, in fact, on the other side. And that's what makes it so volatile and so dangerous, because obviously any confrontation with Russia, even though American troops aren't currently, in Ukraine, don't plan to be in Ukraine, anything can get out of control. And that's why it's a dangerous situation beyond even the poor Ukrainians.
What is your impression of Vladimir Putin right now in that speech from last night or this morning, where he warned anybody who might interfere that bad things would happen? I'm paraphrasing poorly, but that he also mentioned that, casually, that Russia is a nuclear nation.
Yeah, he's reminding everybody that Russia is one of the two nations, really, perhaps three nations in the world that could basically unleash, a Holocaust with a snap of a finger, and he's got that power in his hands. And so he is, in fact, using that as a way of saying, this is my conflict with Ukraine. Stay away. Don't get involved with it. Now, again, President Biden, the United States, the European nations do not intend to get into a military conflict with Russia for that reason alone, if nothing else. But again, when you start this kind of thing in that kind of neighborhood, you never know what can happen. There are European and American troops all around Ukraine in these NATO countries, and anything could happen by accident that triggers some sort of a more dangerous, volatile situation. I thought we saw with Putin's address last night and with the last couple of days is a man who thinks he's at war with history, who wants to rewrite the history of 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. And now he's doing it through force. Yeah, we said it over and over again. He says that the greatest tragedy in recent history is the fall of the USSR, the breakup of the Soviet Union. Peter Baker, thank you so much for being with us. I know you've gotten very little sleep, if any, today, but we do appreciate all of your expertise. All right, right after the break, way too early, with my colleague Hallie Jackson begins. Don't go anywhere.
There's an assault on democracy.
Scorching triple-digit heat.
The new space race begins.
That is actually the potential America has always had.
The change might be around the corner.
Did you get a sense of what the end game is here?
What would happen in ranked choice voting?
That's just not what the facts are.
3 former intelligence officials said there's no way.
That's the heart of the matter, right?
The highly contagious Delta variant of COVID-19 was first discovered in India. Variants can develop anywhere in the world, especially in countries with the lowest vaccination rates. Providing vaccines to the world is not an act of pure generosity. It is an act of self-defense that is necessary to help protect Americans from the spread of future variants.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 on MSNBC.
Whether it's the politics of climate change, the effects of marijuana laws, or the challenges of racial injustice, get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust, like Alicia Menendez, Mehdi Hassan, and Frank Figluzzi, along with a growing list of experts offering their insights. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
When you need brutal honesty.
These conspiracy theories are not only making people stupid, they're making them sick.
When you need answers first thing in the morning.
What's the key to progress to bringing this home and getting this deal done?
When you need to go deep inside Washington.
What is the military posture of the United States now toward Afghanistan?
And hear from someone who's been there.
Perhaps the greatest threat to American democracy right now is misinformation that's being spread around.
You need your Morning Joe, only on MSNBC.
One bill would eliminate the requirement that students be taught the, quote, history of white supremacy, including but not limited to the institution of slavery and the Ku Klux Klan. American history is littered with shameful policies, but it is also filled with freedom fighters. To teach our children anything else is to rob them of their heritage and the truth, and they deserve better.
Controversy in Southlake tonight after teens posted a racist video.
It was a wealthy, idyllic town forced to confront racism.
My children were told Rosa Parks is dead. You all have to sit in the back of the bus.
But when the school board presented its plan, this small town fight ignited a national firestorm.
Critical race theory. Racism in reverse.
False narrative of rampant racism.
Shame.
This is Southlake, an NBC News podcast. All episodes available now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Still to come on the Channel 2 News.
Well, the waters are certainly receding now.
Still too close to call.
Lester Holt reporting from
Ground Zero, as it's being referred to.
It is, in fact, the taste of freedom. The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency. What's the biggest risk right now? Some of the troops who have been proud. I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You with some resilient folks. Let me get a hint.
When you need brutal honesty.
These conspiracy theories are not only making people stupid, they're making them sick.
When you need answers first thing in the morning.
What's the key to progress to bringing this home and getting this deal done?
What is the military posture of the United States now toward Afghanistan?
You need your Morning Joe, only on MSNBC.
Condemn the aggression that you launch on my people. There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell, Ambassador.
That was Ukraine's ambassador to the United Nations with that message to Russia's leadership. Good morning. I'm Hallie Jackson, working today as part of MSNBC's special coverage of the crisis in Ukraine. This is way too early on February 24th, of course. I'm in for Jonathan Lemire. It is noon in Kiev, Ukraine. It's 1 o'clock in Moscow, 5 a.m. Eastern here in Washington, and it's happened. Russia has attacked Ukraine after months of military buildup near the country's borders. Reset how we got here. If you've been sleeping overnight, if you've been watching our coverage, the attack started, as you know, early in the morning, about 5 a.m. local time from neighboring Belarus. This, of course, ally of Moscow, with explosions in several cities across Ukraine, including the capital, Kiev. You heard air raid sirens across that city, Ukrainian officials reporting cruise or ballistic missiles. You hear it there, targeted military control centers. The Office of Ukraine's National Police said at least 6 people have been killed, 7 people hurt in the area near Odessa. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky declared martial law. He's closed schools. He's put hospitals on high alert. We've just heard from him in the last 45 minutes or so. There was a huge exodus. You can see it as thousands of people tried to get out. The attack started just minutes after Russian President Vladimir Putin said in a public address that he authorized military action because he says the West had pushed too far in trying to draw the country into NATO. He also warned other countries against any kind of retaliation, saying, quote, the response from Russia will be so severe that no foreign nations have ever experienced it before. All decisions have been made. We have team coverage here this morning, and I want to start with our reporter who is live from Kharkiv, Ukraine, NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley. So, Matt, tell us what you're seeing. Tell us what it's like on the ground as we've been getting these updates regularly from officials in Ukraine about what's happening.
Yeah, it's not what we're seeing so much as what we're hearing. This war became audible at about 5 a.m. local time. Really just after we heard that speech from Vladimir Putin. It was really chilling. He ended his speech in which he essentially declared war on Ukraine. And then, like that, we started hearing bombs dropping. It was remarkable. But as I said, the war is audible, but here in central Kharkiv, it's not yet visible. The people have left the streets. This was, as of yesterday, a very dynamic town filled with people in the streets. Children, adults going to work. It was difficult to cross the roads. Now the roads are almost empty. The shops are all shuttered, and there are lines at petrol stations and at grocery stores. It's a chilling atmosphere, and it's really just one of waiting. It really stands in stark contrast to what my colleague Aaron McLaughlin is seeing in Kiev, where there are people fleeing, where you're hearing air raid sirens. There are no sirens here. There's no loudspeakers, which was all part of the plan if there was going to be a massive invasion. It's ironic that this city is sort of, if you will, chill compared to Kiev, because actually, if you believe the reports, and we're getting these reports very quickly in a really pell-mell fashion, it's hard to keep up. But if you believe some of the pictures that we're seeing on social media and elsewhere and reports from the Ukrainian government, there are Russian tanks and armored vehicles right outside of Kharkiv. This is the second largest city in Ukraine. So really, the Russians are already here. They're just outside this city. And reportedly, they're setting up checkpoints and blocking cars, blocking traffic. So this city is just watching and waiting and hunkering down. Hallie?
It is a bit different in Kiev. I want to go, Matt, stand by. I want to go to our colleague, Aaron McLaughlin, who's in Kiev and has some developments for us. Aaron, I understand that you're hearing multiple explosions.
That's right, Hallie. Just a short, really moments ago, we heard multiple explosions. One of them, the loudest that we've heard since these explosions began in the small hours of the morning. Already, Ukrainian officials surveying the damage, according to an advisor to the interior minister. A number of missiles struck military installations in the Kiev area, as well as airfields. I received images from an advisor to the mayor of Kiev showing one of the military bases belonging to the National Guard, the windows completely blown out in an apparent missile strike.